Chers auditeurs,
Dear listeners,
bonjour.
welcome in comdarchipodcast Season 4
Saison 4, dans le monde fascinant des architectes.
and in the architectural projects.
Je suis Anne-Charlotte Deponte, passionnée d'architecture et docteur des universités en histoire de l'archi.
I am one of the spokespersons of Anne-Charlotte, who is a PhD in architecture history.
Merci
Thank you
d'être avec moi aujourd'hui.
to be with us today.
Et
And
maintenant,
now,
lundi en français, place au talent.
and Wednesday, let's talk projects. In English, of course.
Bienvenue dans Comme d'Archi.
Dear listeners, hello and welcome to our summer series in Season 4 of Comme d'Archi. This is Esther for Anne-Charlotte. Today, let's continue on the Château de Chenonceau, also known as the Château des Dames, the Ladies' Castle, versus construction and styles. Remember, in the year of the Battle of Marignan, 1515, Thomas Boyer rebuilt Chenonceau. The dungeon of the former Mark Manor House was refurbished, and the core of the castle was built on the pillars of the former mill. The desire for a bridge over the tributary of the Loire had already been mentioned. But it was Philibert Delorme who built it for Jeanne de Poitiers, an excellent horsewoman eager to cross the Cher. Already, the Tour des Marques and Thomas Boyer's castle have Italianate features, based on the medieval structure of cylindrical turrets and bartizans. Windows flanked by pilasters with capitals and entablatures, horizontal moldings en cordon, pediments housing shells and hemmed with hooks, gable and pinnacle dormers, pinnacles treated as candelabra. Italy has long influenced French art and vice versa. As early as the 15th century, artists began traveling to Italy and France. At the court of René d'Anjou, Italian sculptors and miniaturists were already introducing decorative shell motifs, angels, and putti. The expeditions of the kings of France accelerated the phenomenon. Charles VIII returned with Domenico di Cortona. Louis XII and François Ier visited towns and monuments, placed orders, bought models and copies. Above all, they attracted artists to the French court, for a fee, of course. Leonardo da Vinci, who died in Amboise in 1519, is the best-known example, but we can also cite the arrival of Andrea del Sarto, Rosso Fiorentino, Primaticcio, Serlio, and Benvenuto Cellini around 1540. But let's get back to the famous Chenonceau Bridge, because the embellishment work carried out by Jeanne de Poitiers, who became the owner, remains intimately linked to the enhancement of the garden. Philibert Delorme, who had already distinguished himself with his work at Château d'Anay for the Duchesse de Valentinois, was commissioned to carry out the project. His idea was to create a crossing, the starting point of which would be Thomas Boyer's corridor gallery. Work began in 1556, the year the architect was on site. The bed of the Cher was sounded. In April 1557, the construction contract for the cofferdams was signed. In order to build the bridge piers, the water had to be drained away at each pier abutment. To do this, a perimeter of watertight palisades was created, within which the water was drained, enabling the bed to be dug out and the base of the piers to be built. Navigation can then continue between the piers. At the end of Operation Batardo, the palisades were removed. The river resumed its course. Pierre Hurlu is the master mason of the Chenonceau Bridge. The piers are about 5 meters long and built of hard local stone from Chissot and Les Houdes. The arches which extend from the piers are made of soft stone from Bourret, Saint-Aignan and Ly, the famous tuffeau. The points and foreshafts of the piers are cut in such a way as to reinforce strength, i.e., in box-like banks, except for the middle pier. At the time, stone, a heavy material, was quarried mainly along the valleys, whose slopes were veritable geological cross-sections. They were transported by barge on the nearby river. When a major construction project began, one of the first concerns was to maintain the nearby waterway, emphasizes the late André Musat, page 13 of his book Les Chantiers de la Renaissance, published by Picard in March 1991. The genius of architect Philibert Delorme and his client Diane de Poitiers was not only to make it possible to cross the Cher, but also to increase the castle's accommodation capacity by developing a gallery above the bridge. As a passageway, party room, and ballroom, the gallery had become a fixture in all major residences over the course of the century. For example, the Galerie du Lys in Fontainebleau, designed for François Ier. In addition, Philibert Delorme was heir to the great tradition of French masters, attentive to technical problems. He came to the banks of the Cher to decide on the work for the gallery and to have the bridge over the gallery completed. In his estimate after describing the proposed architecture, he turns to the materials. On this 60-meter-long bridge, the gallery will be as wide as the bridge, i.e. about 5 meters. Delorme's gallery at Chenonceau was also to be illuminated on both sides by windows, 1.45 meters wide and 3 meters high, located above the tip of the front beams. These high windows were to project beyond the cornice and over the roof, a new typology that Philibert Delorme had already practiced at Annay. As an option, an additional pier was added to accommodate a drawbridge. The balcony pier was to support 2 small protruding rooms or pavilions intended to house private conveniences, including toilets, a wardrobe, and a spiral staircase to descend to water level. But it wasn't to be. Work on the bridge soon seemed to fall behind schedule. At the end of 1558, for some unknown reason, the pavilion project was abandoned. The gallery had still not been completed by early 1559. 1559, the fateful year when Catherine de Médicis took over Chenonceau. As the new owner, she in turn decided to embellish the grounds. She took up the interrupted project of Diane de Poitiers. She decided to multiply the splendor. From the simple gallery intended by Diane, she transformed it into a 2-level gallery. These levels are topped by a high attic capable of accommodating visitors, even if this means obstructing the visual access worked on by Thomas Boyer. Born in Florence, in the city of the famous Ponte Vecchio, nothing could stop the sovereign. Work began in 1576. It was completed in 1581. The architect was Jean Bulon, who had replaced Philibert Delorme. On the first floor, the gallery is composed of a succession of half-moon turrets. These turrets are set against the platform's eaves. They end in balconies on the second floor. On the noble second floor, the facades are obviously more ornate than on the first floor. They feature tall windows topped by wide, curved pediments, joined by horizontal tables with molded frames. Inside, the galleries form 2 superimposed spaces, 60 meter long and about 5 meter wide. 18 windows bathe them in light. Towards the left bank, the gallery was to end in an oval salon. In the end, the Châtelet de Diane was retained, but its removal is still visible today, as it was demolished at an uncertain date. 2 busts were added to the central bay at the entrance of the castle. 4 new windows were added to the side bays. The aim was to eliminate the castle's Gothic appearance. At the same time, the eastern facade was modified. The small terrace between the chapel and the library was filled in by a 2-story building, thus enlarging the available surface area. This arrangement was finally dismantled during the 19th century restoration by Félix Roguet under the direction of Marguerite Pelouse. This marked the end of the work that gave rise to the castle we know today. It's worth noting During the Renaissance, the owners of the most sumptuous castle avoided turning to a simple master mason, as was common practice at the time. Instead, they turned to the architect, whose, and I quote, science, experience, and talent put him in a position to coordinate the data of the program and give it an optimal resolution. His knowledge of people and things will also enable him to choose the most qualified workers and the materials best suited to the project. End of quote. Catherine Grodecki, page 132 of L'Art de bâtir à la Renaissance, published by Picard in March 1991. But at this time, the appearance of the architect was still very recent, and he was rarely in charge of design through to execution. At most, he was asked for advice. And it was more common for builders to award contracts directly to the various trades. The profession has barely emerged and the battle has already begun. But when we visit Chenonceau, we have to wonder, isn't it worth the effort? Now that we've covered the essentials of Chenonceau's history and architecture, don't hesitate to take a tour and discover every nook and cranny of the magnificent gardens we've only touched on. Finally, let's indulge in the dream of seeing a freewheeling dragoness cross the Cher at Chenonceau on horseback and with her long hair blowing in the wind, inspiring generations to come. Dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. Let's meet again next week for a new and exciting surprise castle. Until then, take care. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening. Thanks to Julien Rebours, sound engineer, who is collaborating with us today. Don't forget to tune in to our previews on Instagram at comdarchipodcast. If you enjoy this podcast, don't hesitate to promote it by giving it 5 stars and a little comment on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast platform. And above all, subscribe to listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.